James is having shrimp tacos with mango, and he's going to talk about war again.
Yeah, I ain't gonna study war no more. Unfortunately, you have to, because there are lots of people studying it and practicing it too. I'd rather study it and try to avoid having to practice. Like the Allied countries, democracy, Russia, Soviet Union. They didn't study war no more. The United States back in I'd read, and it looks as though it's true, that the United States at the outbreak of World War II had the 17th biggest army in the world, sometime around 38. They were actually building it up. They had the 19th biggest army in the world. So all you fake lefties, phony lefties, go around saying Americans are a bunch of warmongers and all that sort of garbage. You're full of garbage. They, of course, in the wake of World War II, they knew they had to do something, especially when a bunch of guys like Klaus Fuchs, as Nicholas Fox, translated into English, he was a so-called Brit. He worked on the Manhattan Project and was doing as much as he could to deliver, and he did effectively deliver the secret of nuclear bombs to the Soviet Union. He delivered it to by that point in time, the worst mass murderer in the history of the world. Even because he'd been at it considerably longer than Adolf Hitler, he'd built up a huge list of victims. I don't think anyone ever kept a very good list. If you're interested, and particularly if you're not interested, you're advised to read Gulag Archipelago, or Gulag Archipelago as it's translated into English. And I think that comes in 3 volumes, put together by Alexander Solzhenitsyn, but unfortunately, it requires a whole encyclopedia. An encyclopedic treatment, I don't think anyone ever has done it, but of all the crimes, war crimes, and crimes against humanity committed by the Soviets, I don't think anyone's ever done the equivalent for Mao Zedong, or Mao Zedong. It's just a different dialect. You're not really cute when you go around saying Mao Zedong and all that sort of stuff. It's just a different, it's really a different language. If you want to say Mao Zedong, that's okay too. It's just a different way of rendering it. Most folks who go around and say that Mao Zedong don't have much of a clue about Chinese or the various languages that comprise that we call Chinese. They're different languages. Okay? Certainly Cantonese is not mutually intelligible with people speak to Mandarin, for example. You'll get somewhat of a different accounting depending on who you're listening to, but the Chinese themselves, I think, say there's 7 different languages that comprise Chinese. I think that's the Mandarin language, the Latter-day Mandarins, the Communist Party, and they're like Mandarins with muscle. And I think linguists tend to say it's more like 6 individual languages. Do I trust the linguists a bit more? Possible. Yeah. Anyway, so check out those stats about how small the American army was, and there seems to be pretty close agreement, how big or small it was before World War II and before they were involved in it. got involved in it before they were involved in it with the Japanese involved in it. From Sarajevo to Potsdam. I was threatening the other day, yesterday as it turns out, to cover this book. So it covers from the beginning of World War I, the incident that precipitated it happened in Sarajevo, assassination of, I think it's the Archduke Franz Ferdinand of the German Empire, really the Prussian Empire. They called it the German Empire, but it was the Prussian Empire. And to a large extent, it was the Prussian Empire reconstituted by Hitler, but with the addition eventually of the Austrian Empire. Really quite a sad state of affairs in the world. Let that happen. Anschluss, Austria, which basically means to include. Anschluss. They took it over, and hardly anyone said boo. Lots of pictures in this, as you might guess. It's written by a guy called A.J.P. Taylor. Did I get that? A.J.P. Taylor. Published 1966, a long time ago. I'm sure there's a lot of politically incorrect things in here, but I don't know whether that's necessarily a good or a bad thing. Benito Mussolini doing a little Hitler-type salute there, you know. Reminds me a lot of Donald Trump. Vain, overweight. I think Trump by times has been much more overweight than Mussolini. So that's Mussolini from 1928. So yeah, some pretty interesting pictures. Let's see if I can see. Yeah. So Russian peasants wait for bread during the famine of 1921. Right there. There's communism in action. You know, danger. Commies at work. Right? They managed to have, I believe it's 3 famines. So 21. That one isn't credited to them for some reason or another. And then there was one early 30s. And then that was just because of collectivization. The reason why this famine happened in 1921, you know, they're saying it's a civil war that caused it. You can have a civil war without having a famine. I don't know if there was much of a famine in the United States as a whole during the Civil War. The problem, what caused that was all land to the peasants. So that was a sound chant coming from Lenin and company. Bad company, as it turns out. And they gave land to the peasants, and particularly to landless peasants. So there were peasants that had land, kulaks they were called by the communists. That means fist. I don't think it was to suggest that they were mean. I mean, you could apply that kind of fist to the commies, but fist as in, you know, holding onto their money bag. I don't think there are too many kulaks that had money bags the way their predecessors, the aristocrats, had. But you know, eventually, the account seems to be that the kulaks were just wiped out as a class. So they were landowning peasants. They were the ones that actually were competent enough to handle their land properly and able to acquire more land. I'm sure there were some not very nice people among them, but if you go into any class of people, you're not going to find terribly nice people. By definition, nobles are ignoble. They are people who've gained their land by not just theft, but robbery. That's one of the things. I don't know whose formula was I think it was even before Karl Marx. Proudhon came up with so this is back in the 19th century, came up with the formulation, all property begins in theft. But no, actually all property begins with robbery. There's a difference. That's theft done with violence, with a threat of violence. See the difference? No, it's okay, I don't care. And, to apply all property begins with theft to capitalists is kind of a little bit naive, because capitalists have tended to do it by taking a little bit there, a little bit, like skimming stuff off the top. So they tend not to gain property by theft per se, they do it by embezzlement. They take a little bit off the top, trying to make it so that people don't notice. Embezzlement. Anyway, so here we go. Long live the Third International here. A bunch of different languages. Of course, they got Russian on top. Zdravствуйте, or whatever it is. I can't read it terribly well, but Third International. Da, let, or yeah. Yeah, live. Es lebe de Dritte National. That's la live. Vive la Troisième Internationale. It's in French. So the second one is German. Long live. English is way down fourth. And then they've got what looks like Armenian or Georgian. It's kind of written in fancy script. No, that's Georgian. And then Armenian underneath it. Those were the important languages to the commies at that point in time. And that's the first Comintern Congress in the Kremlin. So notice Lenin is right here. Guy looks like Stan Mikita there, but not Lenin. This guy here. Lenin actually looked a little bit like Stan Mikita in a rug or something like that. But Mikita, I think, was Czechoslovak. They called him Le Petit Diable at the Montreal Forum, Stan Mikita. And I guess you could call Stalin Gros Diable, Big Devil.
I decided to join you after all.
So I want to point out that this is, what does Comintern mean? It's short for Communist International. Now, it went into abeyance, actually, the Communist International, during much of World War II.
Yeah.
Once the commies were attacked by Germany, I think it started the 22nd attack, started 22nd of June, 1941. And then all of a sudden, the commies were interested in fighting and in allying. But and then they renewed the Communist International about 1947. Because what does that mean? It means Cold War, at best. They were doing Cold War right from the beginning. So, like Winston Churchill was, I think, Fulton, Missouri, 1946, maybe, he was saying, an iron curtain has fallen over Europe, or Middle Europa, Middle Europe, or something like that. He's using the German designation. Middle in German means, along with other things, middle. And it can also mean means, if I'm not mistaken. But you're always going to run into problems like that. There's no such thing as perfect cognates or perfect synonyms or anything like that. But at any rate, it's important to realize that Winston Churchill was basically plagiarizing the work of, I believe it was a journalist, who as early as 1919 or 1918 was using the term Iron Curtain to describe what had fallen over Europe, really, or through the middle of Europe, because of the Communist International. So when they renewed the Communist International, it was sometime around 47, the communists did, all they were doing was officially acknowledging what had been in existence even while it didn't exist between 41 and 47. They were throwing the Iron Curtain near the end of World War II, not right at the end, taking over all sorts of countries. Theoretically, you get apologists for them saying, oh, they needed a buffer zone. No, they already had a buffer zone. The buffer zone existed when we're looking at Germany. The states of Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Belarus, and the Ukraine. None of those are native Russians. Okay? Belarusian means white Russian. Okay? Ukraine actually means border. Krai kind of means border. U means outer border. A huge big country, bigger I think than even Germany itself in terms of land area, and maybe not quite the population, half the population of Germany, but still, like I suspect it was something around 40 million, maybe 35 million or something like that. So they already had a bunch of captive peoples that constituted a buffer zone between Russia and Germany. But that wasn't enough. They had to have more. So they had to have Poland, and they had to have East Germany, and they had to have Hungary, and they had to have what's now the Czech Republic, and now the Slovak, whatever it's called. I think they call the Czech Republic now Czechia. Slovakia, I guess, is what they call Ruthenia, which has never, I think, been acknowledged as an independent state. They had to have Bulgaria. They had to have the collective, back then, the collective designation Yugoslavia, but that involved Slovenia. That involved Serbia. That involved Croatia. That involved Macedonia. That involved Bosnia-Herzegovina. That involved Albania. That involved Bosnia. That involved Romania. And also one of the republics was Moldava, a Moldavian republic.
You're sounding like a Bob Dylan song.
Yeah, I know. But the difference is I'm giving a complete listing. When I listen to listings by Bob Dylan, I'm going, yeah, but you left stuff out, or you're including too much. That's one of the troubles with those listing kind of things. If there's a listing, it better be complete, or better not, or it better be good examples, like really powerful examples, 2 or 3 examples. But like what does a hard rain's going to fall? What are all those? The listing of all these things. I saw a young babe with wild wolves all around it and all this sort of stuff. What does it mean? And that's one of his better listing songs. So understand, I'm not doing a song. If I'm boring people, they aren't paying attention, because the thing is, you've got to, I'm giving a complete listing as I can off the top of my head of all the countries they took over at the end of World War II. This is before World War II ended. They were already aggrandizing territory to themselves. And I think I basically gave a full account of all this. And that's, they were trying to get hold of Greece, and they were trying to get hold of Italy. And they came close, I think, with Greece. I don't think they did enough to in here to point out how weak the democracies were in the face of. Now they're looking at Europe, but here's a bunch of skunks. Von Hindenburg, right there, big hero, and I'm putting that in inverted quotation marks, or scare quotes, as some people call it. And in there is Kaiser Wilhelm. What is it, the second? You say the Kaiser. And there's Erich von Ludendorff. He was even more of a hero during World War I. He almost beat the Allies even after the Americans joined, but this is after Russia dropped out of World War I. And he had a big offensive. And after World War I mean, he caused so many people to die. Then he exhibited his great good taste by joining up with the Nazis. He was considered so highly by the troops, the German troops. This is after World War I, when Hitler had his little beer hall putsch. I believe it was in Munich, and I believe it was 22. Ludendorff went marching down the street. All the Nazis were taking cover from the soldiers who were sent to commissioned to get ready to suppress the beer hall putsch. Ludendorff, can you imagine this? He kept on marching because he knew the soldiers wouldn't shoot him. He really wasn't brave. They were still loyal to him. Right? Geeky-looking idiot. Maybe he was a big war hero at one point in time. I can't see it because the Germans' previous war had been 1870-71. So how much sooner is that? That's like 40 years before. So yeah, maybe he was a young pup during that. But that war was, the French were so incompetent. They invaded Germany, and the next thing you know, the Germans weren't in Berlin, the capital of the German Empire. They were in Paris, the capital of the French Empire, and it was an empire back then. Not so much on European land, but they had a huge empire in Africa, and they had imperial holdings in Southeast Asia, Indochina, French Indochina is called, and they had an occasional holding in South Asia, like in little small enclaves in India.
Did you want some of my Greek salad?
Sure, exactly right. So here's the Archduke Franz Ferdinand dressed like a peacock, and I don't know why he'd want to call attention to himself. But of course Donald Trump's kind of doesn't cut a very impressive figure, running to obesity. Same thing with this dude. Why would someone like this call attention to himself?
Yep, not pretty.
Especially when people are gunning for him, and I think they took him out with guns. I think they tried to bomb at first and stuff like that. They call them South Slav nationalists, but I don't know whether the guy was a Serbian or a Croatian. I don't think they were interested in. Maybe they were separate.
About 5 minutes.
Okay, there we go. So I didn't particularly care for this book, just showing you some of the pictures. One of the things that's a huge problem here is there's way too much emphasis on the arts and literature. Maybe the arts move people, I don't know. Like here we've got, for the between war periods, Luigi Pirandello actually acted in a play by him, but I don't know if it has much to do with that. T.S. Eliot was a kind of a Nazi sympathizer, fascist maybe more sympathizer. Anti-Semite looks like Marcel Proust. And who is this guy? I don't recognize him. André Gide. He should be recognized. He, I believe in the 30s, had been at the very least a communist sympathizer. He wrote an expose of the Soviet Union. This is well before Animal Farm and maybe 10 years before, or even more, in 1984, André Gide. Check him out. He turned against the commies, and no one seemed to take note. Berlin Expressionism, Kurt Weill. Bertolt Brecht, definitely a commie, this guy. A doofus. I don't think he ever, and they actually had not just a picture of him, but a picture from one of the plays that he wrote. He was a playwright. Okay, Ben Shahn, Passion of Sacco and Vanzetti. Yeah, like where they railroaded, it looks like, but who did the whacking? Like people are saying, oh, it's a sign of how racist the Americans were back then, still are. Well, like apparently it was, who killed? Oh, it was the mafia, Italian mafia, did the killings that these guys were blamed for. I'd like to think they weren't involved with the mafia, but yeah. Sacco and Vanzetti, here they are actually down here in their coffins and stuff like that. That's a very poorly done painting, I guess it is. So, yeah. And of course you get guys like Bertolt Brecht. I believe, is he the one who did Threepenny Opera? And yeah, with Kurt Weill, he wrote the music. Now, both of these guys are commies. And, America is portrayed in that thing as being, capitalism generally as being, even though the Threepenny Opera is a remake of something written, a play, I believe, written by a guy called John Gay. And it would have been set in England. So, yeah, I'd forgotten where the Dry Groschen Opera, or whatever, is actually set. But it has a guy called Makeith, I think, is the hero bad guy in that. But, the mafia, the mob, is not really part of American sort of thing. But American capitalists are portrayed as mobsters. 2 minutes?
A minute and a half, less than that.
As mobsters in that. And the commies are always doing that. No, the mob, the mafia, they're foreign to the United States. The three main groups were part Irish, so I'm going to mention the Irish, and Italians. I'm not going to mention the third group because too much emphasis has been put on the negative impacts in various societies that they've actually been the most positive influence in any society they've ever been in. So here we go, Nazis in the making. Children demonstrated in Munich. This is even before the Nazis came to power, 8 years before they got kids out with the flags. And I can remember getting involved with stuff that my parents were enthused about. Nothing like this, of course, but church stuff, so on and so forth. And I was embarrassed to heck. Maybe those kids were embarrassed too. They should have been. But the parents who put them up to that should have been embarrassed. Here's Hitler out of uniform. You ever seen Hitler in lederhosen? That's hilarious. You kind of wish he'd got up. They got some film and he'd do that thigh slapping and